All right, it's 6 o'clock. Emily, did you want to go ahead and start the webinar?
Yes. Good evening. Welcome everyone to the next installment of there we go, of the PAiD Free Professional Development Workshop Series for Artists. We will be allowing a moment for folks to join the Zoom call. So bear with us just a few minutes as everyone gets on, and then we will start in just a few minutes. Good evening again, and welcome to the next installment of the Free Professional Development Workshop Series for Artists. This is part of the PAiD Public Artists in Development program, a program of LA County Arts and Culture with funding from the Mellon Foundation and support in development and delivery by Dickson and Womack. We're excited to welcome back those of you who are returning, who have been coming to all or many of these workshops. We are coming to the end of the online version of the workshops, and so we welcome you back for these, and we are looking forward to anyone who may be new and joining for the first time tonight. Welcome as well. As always, we are joined tonight by some incredible co-hosts who are going to be sharing their expertise, their experience, their knowledge with us. I will be sharing more about them in a few moments. And then we will also, as always, make time for a Q&A. So a few things. This is the opening remarks. My name is Emily Womack. I am co-founder and managing partner at Dickson and Womack. Again, Dickson and Womack is supporting the development and delivery of the PAiD program. I am also joined tonight by Allie M. Allie is a project manager at Dickson and Womack and is also supporting the PAiD program in many ways. Allie will be doing an introduction to some of the other elements of the PAiD program that you might be interested in beyond the workshop series. We will also preview the last two online workshops that are going to be next week. Those will be coming up, like I said, on Tuesday and Wednesday next week. And then we will jump into tonight's topic with our guest presenters, followed by the Q&A. The Q&A will be done through the Q&A tab. So in your Zoom bar, whether that's at the bottom or at the top, there should be a little button that looks like a little book that says Q&A. If you want to click on that, then that's where you can enter your questions. You're welcome to enter the Q&A questions at any time during the session. As they come up, as you think of things, just go ahead and put them into the Q&A. And then when we get to that point in the evening, Allie and I will help facilitate going through those questions. I also want to note that we are recording these sessions, and they will be posted online for viewing in the future. They'll be posted through the LA County Arts and Culture PAiD program and on their YouTube channel. And we will definitely send out a notice to everyone when that's available. We also want to share the land acknowledgement for the County of Los Angeles. The County of LA recognizes that we occupy land originally and still inhabited and cared for by the Tongva, Tautaviam, Serrano, Kizh, and Chumash peoples. We honor and pay respect to their elders and descendants, past, present, and emerging, as they continue their stewardship of these lands and waters. We'll leave this open for the rest to read the rest. And I will now pass it over to my colleague, Allie.
Hi, everyone. My name is Allie, and I'm a project manager at Dyson Womack. I've been working with Emily on the PAiD program and helping deliver it. And I will be going over the many components of it. First, so PAiD is a program of the LA County Department of Arts and Culture with funding by the Mellon Foundation, and it's a multi-year initiative that aims to advance the career growth and economic empowerment of underrepresented artists in LA County. One of the main goals of the program is to address the historical barriers that artists face when trying to enter public art, and also deal with the wider challenges that artists encounter throughout their careers. And so the program is made of multiple components. We first have the professional development workshops, it's a series of free workshops designed to provide valuable skills and resources to artists of all backgrounds and career stages who are interested in public art. And I will be going over this more in detail in the next slide, but we have 2 final workshops next week. And I will be providing the link to register for them in the next slide as well. And then we have the Artist Council. We launched the first open call in the last fall, and we'll be launching it again in early 2025. The Artist Council is a group of 8 selected artists commissioned to engage in a series of policy discussions and to make recommendations to the county. They also get to create temporary public artworks. And if you want, you can catch the final temporary artwork installations through the end of September all across LA County. And you can check for where you can see them on the county's Instagram newsletter or on Dyson Womack's Instagram. And then we have the PAiD apprenticeship. So the public art apprenticeship it's another open call for artists that launched last week, and the deadline to submit is November 7th. The apprenticeship program is designed to address tough entry barriers to the field of public art by providing artists with the necessary training and support to successfully manage their first public art commission. The open call is open to visual artists working in any media who primarily reside in LA County. It's also open to artists who have not previously been commissioned for a permanent public art project by a municipality or government agency program. 2 cohorts of 5 artists, so 10 artists total, will be selected for this call, and the RFQ is available on the county's website, and I'll also provide the link in the group chat. And then we have the PAiD website. This is another resource for artists. This website is going to include all of the recordings of the professional development workshops and other resources relative to the field. The launch of this website is to be determined, but we will notify all attendees when this becomes live. So these are our final workshops. The next one is next Tuesday, October 1st, administering a public art project. And for this workshop, we're going to be joined with 2 project managers from the Arts and Culture Department. And they're going to be going over a comprehensive overview of the life cycle of a public art commission. So we're going to walk through the various stages that define public art projects, from design and engineering to fabrication and installation. And then next, our final workshop is crafting a career in public art. We're going to be joined by artists who have sustained a professional career as an artist and relative to the public art field. And we're going to engage in an open dialogue with them, asking them questions about the challenges and opportunities they've encountered. I really think that crafting a career, or both of these workshops, are going to be really rewarding for artists, especially if you want to, professionally develop your skills, and enter into the field of public art. And this blue link right here at the bottom is where you can register for them, and I'll also put that in the group chat.
Thank you so much, Allie. So tonight we're talking about managing a project budget. So we met earlier on to talk about budgeting, from the get-go when you're invited to participate in an open call. But tonight we are joined by two project managers from the Susan Narduli studio, and we are going to take a much deeper dive into how to craft a budget, build a budget, and manage it through the life cycle of a project. We've talked a lot in this series about how the life cycle of a public art project is a lot longer than perhaps maybe some other avenues of art. And so we're going to really look closely at the challenges and the rewards of working with finances across that time. As I mentioned, we are welcomed here tonight by Victor Gomez Mustafa. Victor is a senior project manager and senior designer at Narduli Studio. For those of you who are not familiar, they're going to share a little bit more about Narduli Studio and Susan's work as we go through this as well. Victor has been working in the public art field for almost a decade and has been involved in the design and delivery of permanent, custom-built public art installations across the globe. His work is focused on architectural scale, interactive, new media, and data-driven generative art environments. As a project manager, he has gained direct experience in preparation and administration of these complex projects. And tonight, he will be sharing his knowledge on how to best prepare and manage projects for public art installations. Victor is a licensed architect and studied architecture and urban and regional studies at UCLA. Thank you so much for joining us tonight, Victor.
Thank you.
And we're also joined by Vivek Sai. Vivek is a senior project manager and architectural designer, also at Narduli Studio. Vivek has over close to 2 decades of experience in construction industry. And I also had the pleasure of working with Vivek more closely on a project a few years ago for a commission for the state of California up in Sacramento. So it was nice to be able to reconnect tonight and to meet your colleague as well. Vivek has education, also background in architecture, but also urban design and planning. He contributes to the design and consulting firms like URS Corporation, West Edge Architects, and of course, Narduli Studios, where he has worked on many projects, including project typologies, design build, and public art installations, while handling scopes of work through all stages of the project from conceptual design to final implementation. He complemented his design background with a graduate education in business administration, concentrating in finance and real estate. That is an amazing combination. Following up with a year working for Coastline Real Estate Investments, Vivek has an extensive experience as a liaison between clients, consultants, and contractors. So thank you, Vivek, for joining us tonight and being so willing to both of you to share your experience and your expertise. Now, with that being said, I am going to pass the baton to you both.
Thank you, Emily. Appreciate the introductions.
Of course.
Yeah. So as Emily mentioned, I'm Victor Gomez Mustafa, Senior Project Manager and Senior Designer in Narduli Studio. And I'm accompanied by Vivek Sai, who's also a Senior Project Manager. We both work for Narduli Studio, and we'll be presenting managing a project budget. Next slide, please. So Narduli Studio is an interdisciplinary practice working at the intersection of art, architecture, technology, and public space, and it's led by artist and architect Susan Narduli. We are a creative team of professionals from different fields, such as visual and media arts, architecture, landscape, and urban design. Our work focuses on creating language of engagement through public art and through environment, exploring boundaries of technology and meaning. It includes architectural scale, permanent public art installations, and we strive to create immersive and interactive urban spaces. And for this presentation, we'll focus on the management of a public art project, and we will share our experience on best ways to succeed. Between Vivek and I, we've managed a range of project budget sizes from $100,000 to $2 million. And we will be discussing project factors and how they relate to budget, how to process and implementing budget management work plan, and carrying it out through the project phases. We will discuss two examples to help describe our work and how we've managed those budgets. And lastly, we'll touch base on specifics for project management methodologies, scope management, and examples of budget spreadsheets. Next slide. Project factors. There are three main components that sort of drive the budget. We have, of course, the budget, the design complexity or the design itself, and the schedule. These three factors are very integrated within each other and in a way balance each other out. A change in one aspect of one of these factors will definitely impact the other factors. So if there's a change in the design complexity or your initial design could create different aspects of complexity to installation and fabrication, it's going to affect your budget significantly. And same thing with schedule. Usually, projects will have a predetermined schedule that you will have to meet a target, and that will also drive your budget and what you could do within your design and complexities. So we are a design build studio, and meaning that we create design concepts and procure the fabrication and the installation delivery through the entire process. Most public art commissions are structured in this way, and artists are responsible for the entire project delivery, which of course includes the budget.
And usually on a fixed budget as well.
That's right.
Most of our projects are.
Yeah, and the budget is the amount of funds available to design, manage, fabricate, and install the projects. And as Vivek mentioned, it is typical for public art projects to be structured with a fixed fee. So all the costs associated for the project are not to exceed that amount of funds that you've been given.
And just to add to what Victor said about, this this concept of, budget, schedule, and design, like we mentioned, it's a fixed fee. This fee is usually fixed at the beginning, when it's in the competition phase or in the conceptual design phase, and you're given a rough idea of how long the project schedule is at that time. You have to come up with the budget. You have to come up with laying out your schedule and how you go about it, and also design your project as well. You may or may not have a design at that time, but you have to sort of gear your design towards the budget and schedule constraints that are put on you early in the project.
Correct. And as you go through the process, and while the artist will be the main responsible party for managing the budget, it does become a team effort. So it does require the project manager, clients, contractor, fabricator, all to work together to meet your goal of staying within budget and delivering a project with your design intent.
And just sort of in our experience, these three items which you see here, the ideal situation is you get 2 out of the 3. And this is something that artists should understand. And also you need to make sure that your clients understand this as well. If you want a great design and you want it in budget, then you have to give the artist the time to be able to do so. If you want a great design and you want it on schedule, then you have to be able to pony up the money to make this happen. And if budget and schedule are constrained, there's no compromise on that, then the artist has to design his work based on those constraints. You cannot promise something and under-deliver and things like that. So.
Next slide.
I was going to say, I just really love that metaphor. It's like it's a tripod, and we all know, that a triangle is an excellent foundation. It's a really strong base in many ways, but it's also very vulnerable if one of those is undermined, it topples. And I think that's a great metaphor for this, that those 3 really, you can only compromise one.
Yeah, well, at least one.
Yeah.
It's the oldest cliche in construction. It's been around since humanity started. So
totally.
Okay, so here we have a budget management work plan. Essentially, we're trying to identify how budget could be impacted by schedule, also impacted by contract deliverables, things that you need to keep in mind as budget is tied to your contract and it's tied to your delivery schedule. We'll get more into detail later on this, but we have just a quick representation of what it usually takes to create a budget and manage it. So in the center, we have the budget bubble, tying it to contract deliverables on the left. On the right, we have the schedule that ties it to the schedule itself, how the schedule could impact your budget. You need to keep track of that and how coordination conflicts and material procurements could also impact your schedule. And then it goes into the bottom row and start to the left. You have your initial budget. So you prepare that at the beginning of concept phase or competition phase. And it's, as we mentioned, it's a fixed fee, and you will continue to track that budget and your services and your expenses at every project milestone. And lastly, continue to update it as the project moves along. It's sort of this changing element of the project that you have to revisit very often. Next.
Thanks, Victor. And I just want to go a little more into detail into how you sort of lay out your project milestones, your contract deliverables, whether your contract is with your client or your subcontractor is contracted with you. The milestones of those contracts match the phases of the project. And we've been mentioning competition phase, so I just want to elaborate that in our projects, we sort of divide them into these rough milestones or phases. So the first is the competition or the concept design phase. This is usually a phase that you do not get paid for. You're putting yourself out there, you're getting into a competition. Sometimes clients will compensate you for your time, but most of the time not. So whatever work you're putting into this phase is pretty much pro bono. You're trying to get the project and then move into those phases. So it's good to keep track of the hours you spent in the competition phase, because you have to recover that as part of the compensation you get for the project if you're chosen to be the artist for the project. Once we secure the project, we sign contracts with the client. That's when the remaining project phases come into play. And we usually have a schematic and design development phase, when we usually take our concept designs, develop it further. We work with the clients. We have, sessions with them, try to understand their concerns. Are we addressing all their needs, etc., and hone in on a design and get the client's approval at the end of this phase before we move into the next phase, which is construction documentation and or permitting. Permitting, it depends on what your artwork is, so whether it requires permitting or not. A lot of our art projects, you'll see a couple of examples in a bit, are like LED animated artworks. Usually has a lot of electrical work, a lot of structural work involved with that. So definitely we have to put our drawings and etc. through a permitting process. And the third phase, which we have here, is dedicated to that, is that you take your designs, you come up with your detailed drawings, all your consultants, whether it's electrical engineer, plumber if you have a water feature, or your artwork involves water and so on, structural work and so on, and try to get those drawings done, get it approved by the client, and then obviously approved by all the regulatory agencies, Department of Building Services, fire department, whoever you need to go to. We've had to deal with very varied amount of people, like Coast Guard for our projects in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Lots of art commissions, visual arts committees, which are elected by people, obviously, to oversee artwork. So this all approvals and final design work in the drawings is done in this third phase. Get approvals for that, and once you have the notice to proceed from the client, you move into fabrication and procurement, which is you get into contracts with your subcontractors, consultants, subcontractors for fabrication and so on. Get your material, put it together, assemble, get it installed, and then have the project close out. Now, we usually, like, the fabrication and procurement phase is when we get into contracts with our installers and our fabricators to actually do the physical work. Usually the schematic design and design development phase is when we get into contracts with our consultants, like electrical engineers, plumbing engineers, and structural engineers, and so on. When you're in the competition phase and you're trying to come up with a design or a proposal for the project, if possible, try to have your consultants and your fabricators on call, discuss your design with them, and try to reach a sort of budget number. And that's something we'll go into detail as well in this early phase, which is when you're submitting your budget during the competition phase, that the client is more often than not going to hold you to that budget. And so it's good to have your consultants and fabricators early on as possible, so that you can figure these numbers out early and maybe not have too many surprises down the line. So once you have the project milestones and your phases laid out, your budgeting then is pretty much figuring out, okay, what are you being compensated? When are you being compensated? So which phase, how much you get paid? And you make sure that what you're getting paid covers what you have to pay out to your consultants and your fabricators and so on at each phase. So we will show you a little bit more after our project examples. We will show you a way to sort of break this down really quickly and work with it during the competition phase. So just remember a few things, try to align client payments to expenses by milestone. So look at your income and expenses by milestone. Ensure that client payments client makes a payment to you at signing of agreement. What that means is that you preferably, and this does not work every time, you want to get paid at the beginning of the phase for the work you're going to do in the phase, because there'll be payments out to your consultants and so on. So you want to, in your contracts with your clients, you want to negotiate or try to negotiate getting paid before for your work rather than after. Now, we've had certain clients who've been adamant that they pay us only after the work. It's much harder to do so. So you should probably price in a little bit extra to your fee so that it covers the stuff that you have to go through with that sort of thing. Make sure that you're covering your cash flows, like, and invoicing and so on at every phase. Break up your phases into 25%, 50%, 75%, however you want to do it, and keep track of that, and constantly keep track of what you budgeted in the competition phase versus what things will actually cost you down the line. A lot of our projects take 1 to 2 years to complete. So we do come up with budgets in the competition phase early, but there's a lot of surprises that can come down the line, and we'll go a little more into detail about that. But Victor, you can go ahead to the next slide.
I was going to add one more thing here just quickly, is that the reason why it's important to get payments ahead or tied to your milestones is because you're going to have to pay your fabricators, you have to pay your suppliers ahead of time. And if you don't have those funds, it's going to hold up your schedule. And if we, and as we discussed earlier, is the schedule is very tied to the budget in terms of meeting targets with the construction team or meeting targets for a specific reason.
Right.
So
And
you don't want to have a situation where you have to pay out your consultants and you're waiting for your client to pay you. And usually these are public art, so it's cities and counties and stuff like that. It takes them a month just to process a payment sometimes. So you have to be mindful of that. Just remember that, like, one of the things which we at least make sure on our end is that at the beginning of the fabrication and procurement phase, we get a pretty big payment because we have to give 50% deposits to our fabricators and so on. So large payment is usually dedicated at the beginning of that fourth phase, and try to get as much of the previous phases, most of them at the beginning of the second phase, which is schematic. After you get the project and at signing of the agreement with the client, try to get front loaded with your payments so that you have money to pay out or to be nimble in your ideas and so on.
Have you seen shifts over time in the years you've been working on willingness of commissioning agencies to pay up front? Or do you feel like that's still hit and miss?
Most of our clients pay up front. So that's usually the case. We've had a couple of really outlier sort of cases where they've been insistent that they want to pay after the fact. But I feel that in our experience, at least, the usual thing is that clients are usually okay with paying upfront. But you need to negotiate this during your contracts. They won't offer it to you. Like, you need to ask for it. So,
here we have a quick just success roadmap. Just really applies to anything in life, but here for this instance, we're gonna be using it for managing a budget. Ideally, we have, you try to create an initial budget, and your goal is to maintain that initial budget through the entire delivery, while also maintaining the design intent and schedule or any other of the items. But along the way, you're gonna hit roadblocks or little failures. Failure is just a part of success. So you're gonna have to hit some roadblocks, some failures that are mainly related to higher costs that are expected or other unforeseen circumstances. And at that time, you just you try to figure out how can you remain with your design intent. You start sourcing alternatives and different suppliers or different installers, different fabricators, anything that could help bring your budget back to your initial estimate. And most often, you will find some alternatives that will fit within your budget. Okay.
I imagine in the cases when you may need to go back to a commissioner and say, hey, that being able to show that you have done the due diligence and attempted, in the worst case where maybe you can't find an alternative, that it's very helpful to be able to show like, hey, we have tried this, we've gone through all of these means. It's not like every time you hit a roadblock, it's like you actually have done that due diligence and that work. And then with all of those things are exhausted, then it's a much stronger argument to go back and say, you know, all of these have been exhausted. We really do need an increase in the budget for this or this reason.
Yeah, exactly. That's a good point, Emily. And also there are gonna be things that are just out of your control and that you can bring up to your commissioner as well. All right. Next, we're gonna get into some of the project examples. Just brief, the first project we're gonna be showing is Virtual Sky. It's the most customized artwork that we have designed and delivered. Over 90% of its components were custom fabricated. Okay, next slide.
Victor, you want me to take?
No, I'll take care of this one.
Yeah.
So the artwork of Oklahoma City Convention Center is a call to reconsider the changeable, majestic sky that is so much a part of the city environment, its cultural history, and its economy. Virtual Sky is conceived as its energy of fixed and fluid elements, a layering of form and light and movements captured in real time. Here, the beauty of changeability of the Oklahoma sky is just reconceptualized through technology. Next. The suspended artwork spans two atriums at 100 feet and 70 feet tall from left to right. Within each, anodized titanium forms create an environment inspired by the sky movement. The palette evokes subtle shifts of color one experiences throughout the day and throughout the season. Within this field of color, 60,000 points of light connected to a stream of Oklahoma City open data trace weather patterns in real time. This data is analyzed and translated into patterns of light to create real-time shifts in movement and color that reflect upon the natural world. Next.
So as Victor mentioned, like Virtual Sky is one of the most custom projects that we have built. Pretty much 90% of the components of this artwork were bespoke for this particular piece. We may use some of these components for future projects, but it was made for that particular setting. Some of the examples that you see here are like what you see on the top left is the voxel display, which is like 10 LEDs around the chipboard. And we have like close to like 80 feet tall or 60 feet tall strands, which have maybe 15 to 20, sometimes 25 of these voxel points all along the way. And that's how you saw the animated LEDs, which you saw in the previous video. So on the right, you can see the cable strand, and the video sort of demonstrates what's at the top of each of the strands. You have the lights on the strands, but then the information needs to be sent to that from a central computer, which then goes to this processing unit at the top of the strand, and then goes to each of the chips that are within each strand. Now, we had two kinds of strands. One is, of course, the LED, and the other was just regular aircraft cable, which had titanium tubes, which were colored in a certain way. We had a few finishes on them, and it alternated between LED strands and titanium physical strands. So the lights and the LED strands were animated, so they would have this thing at the top. But the other things, it was just hanging titanium tubes, which you see on the right over there. And this definitely was pretty challenging. When we started this project, we did not even know who we would be working with. We didn't know fabricators and things like that to be able to get this vision down. So that was one of the first things we had to do after we got the project, was research into that. We got a consultant to help us out with that as well. There was some expenditure there early on in the project. But what we're happy to say that the people we worked with on this project, we've worked with them on multiple projects since. So it's been a very positive and a profitable sort of endeavor for us. Next slide, please. So this is just another video looking at the piece, looking up at the piece from the lowest floor of the atriums. In this particular case, it's about 60 feet above you. The other atrium has 90 feet. As you see, there's alternating LED strands with hanging titanium, and basically 60,000 points of light with, around 6,000 LED diodes and 550 strands total, and overall close to 120,000 cubic feet of artwork. We had to work a lot with the existing building, and by existing building, I mean this was a new convention center being built in Oklahoma City. It was under construction while we got the project. We worked with the contractors who were building the main building, worked with their worked around their work as well, and designed our artwork to sort of do so. If you can replay that, yeah, you can just replay that. What you notice is the ceiling in the background is not very clear, but that's a perforated metal ceiling, and it was already in the design of the building before we even got there or got the project. So we've designed our strands and our grid to match with the perforations in their ceiling, which was designed by others. So this is a lot of the custom work that you're going to come up with in these kind of public projects. So, and if you go to the next slide, there was a lot of specialty equipment as well that we had to look into. You can see in the top left over there the perforated ceiling with the small perforations, and we just basically matched our artwork sort of coming down within those perforations. And because these atriums were close to 100 feet tall and 70 feet in the second case, we had to look into boom lifts and things like that for our installers, which would be able to get up at 200 feet. What you have to understand is that the lifts which get up there are pretty large, and they should be able to get inside the building as well. So there we had to look at the door sizes in the building and see what was the path the equipment would have to take. And secondly, like a lot of times when we are working in projects like this, where you are working with the main project contractors, they're not going to really allow you or your installers to use their equipment. There's a liability issue with that. There are certain projects where we've had to go through OSHA classes and so on, so that they would allow us to do so. But in most projects, they don't. So we had to source the lifts. We had to source any equipment, our installers, and that all adds to the cost of the artwork. In this case, the lifts were not available in Oklahoma. They had to be brought in from Texas and so on. So the cost of bringing in equipment from another state and so on had to be added to the budget as well. You can go to the next slide. And what's important when you're thinking about the budget is ask yourself, when you're starting out the design in the competition phase, obviously there's a number that your client gives you, which is the overall artwork budget, and that's what you aim at. But ask yourself, okay, what are you proposing and how complex is it? The more the complexity, the more custom work and so on, then you have to plan your budgets accordingly. There have to be more allowances and set asides so that you can handle any surprise that comes along the way. So that's a very important thing, is to ask yourself, how complex is the project which you are proposing and which you want to build. With the virtual sky thing, there are certain things that we were able to foresee, We knew that the lobbies were large and there would be some complexities associated with that. We knew that the installation was going to be complex because our installers would have to work with construction in the building that is happening around our artwork as well. We also understood that most of our work will be custom, so we would have to figure out certain things from scratch, and they're not available off the shelf. So that's something, and so we knew that we had a highly complex project at the beginning. A lot of our allowances and so on, like we wanted to come up with allowances and numbers early on in the project. So we were trying to get our consultants, our fabricators on board as early as possible, because this is a highly complex project. We were trying to get them on board sooner rather than later. So we would have better rough order of magnitude or ROM numbers, as we call it, early on, so that we can plan for it as we go into construction.
Yeah.
Obviously, there's a lot of stuff we didn't foresee as well. COVID happened during this project. So that's something once in 100-year event. So something we came out of left field. And there were certain problems with, like the materials. A lot of our suppliers and installers our installers and fabricators are in the United States, but a lot of their suppliers are in China, in Europe, in other parts of the world. And certain products that came in had, issues after they were delivered. So we had to sort of tack and ask for a little bit more time from the client to fix certain issues so that it would be up to scratch and when installed. Victor, you were.
This one in particular require light consultant and design assist to create those light fixtures. And that was something we had a budget for, and also making sure that our consultant and our fabricators understood that we were also on a fixed fee. All the team members need to be aware of that fixed fee structure. And like, as I mentioned, it's just that team effort to make, especially in a project that is just custom where you don't know anything, it has to be very clear and communicated amongst everyone.
This is definitely one of our more complex or custom pieces. And Victor's now going to go into another project, which is less so, because we used a lot of off-the-shelf items, but we still designed it. It still involved custom work and design, but it was helpful to use off-the-shelf products.
Yeah. So the next project we'll talk about will be Skyline. This is located at the Convention Center in Charlotte. This is in contrast to our previous project, Virtual Sky, since about 80 to 90% of the components were off the shelf. It was still a custom integration within the site, but most of our components we were able to source from suppliers that were readily available.
And is part of the budget impact of custom versus uncustom, that piece that you were both talking about at the beginning of getting your fabricators and stuff on board? Because with an existing piece of equipment, you can go and look at what it costs online. But if someone is making something from scratch, you have to have them bid on it, negotiate on it. Their costs might change too, because they're also sourcing things. And so it just introduces more risk, and it's harder to know those costs at the competition phase, right? Because you're asking them to do work, and pricing things out that's speculative, or they may not get the job if you don't get the job. So
Yeah.
they may not be as willing to budget it for you at that point. I just thought, I think that's the real, for me, the budget impact of that distinction between custom and uncut and off the shelf is just, the availability of the cost, even though costs might increase over time.
Oh, definitely. And custom versus off the shelf. Like off the shelf, you usually have cut sheets, you have documentation, testing. There's a lot of stuff you can look at and figure things out, how it fits, what are the size. It's fixed.
Yeah.
But when you're coming up with something, it's definitely, I think a good advice is to think of your projects in two main terms. One is custom versus off the shelf. And the other is complexity versus how much of design is in it versus how much it's just an assembly of parts.
And I
So
think
yeah, and you basically have, and you have 4 quadrants then, right? You have more custom versus less custom, left to right, and then more complex versus less complex.
yeah.
Just look at your project and try to put it in one of the 4 quadrants and figure out what exactly happens with that project, right? That's very
Yeah.
important for the budgeting part of it.
And that would relate to any medium or material as well.
Yeah.
Victor, so you were saying this one was 80 or 90% off the shelf as opposed to the last one.
That's correct.
Okay.
All right. So Skyline, located at the Charlotte Convention Center. Next slide, please. Our concept was based on ever-changing rhythms of the city, reimagined as an immersive experience of abstract animations. Next. Skyline is the site-specific artwork on the pedestrian and light rail bridge that connects the Charlotte Convention Center to Stonewall Station light rail stop. It juxtaposes urban imagery and dynamic context to create a visual narrative of the city of Charlotte. The artwork can be experienced from Stonewall Street, from the passing trains, from neighboring buildings, and from the bridge. The focal point of the artwork is a viewing platform at the center of the bridge. Skyline evokes the breadth of the city through a welcoming and slow transforming space. Next.
These are both beautiful projects, by the way.
Thank you. So Skyline, incorporates off-the-shelf light fixture bars to create the media for us to display these animations. Integrated within the internal walls and ceiling of the overlook cube. We have 15 different animations and covers about 700 square feet across the 3 planes. Getting those 3 planes was really important for us to create that immersive experience of the cube and the animations and bringing the whole concept and design intent together.
And I would just like to point out that even though this is 90% off the shelf, the complexity in this project was that we had to work with that cube, which was designed by the architects of the building. It was already there. We had to work with the metal panels and so on. We had a certain amount of space. I don't know, Victor, was it like 2.5 inches behind that metal to fit all our lights and our structure? So we had to come up with, an off-the-shelf products to do so. But like, even though we are assembling off-the-shelf stuff, there's still complexity in fitting our artwork into a context that is completely different from, like, we did work on those main concepts.
And this also was a project that was during construction. So we had to meet certain deadlines. And so schedule was very important. Schedule was very important because we needed to coordinate our delivery in time for the metal panel installation as well. We were not in charge of supplying the metal panels, but we were in charge of designing the custom pattern. That's one example of how different scopes could differ and how they could impact your budget as well, because that complexity of schedule coordination is going to be very, very tight in terms of schedule and when you need to be there and when you need to get out of there.
And while you guys probably feel like a larger team to some of our participants in the workshop tonight, you're definitely the smaller fish in the room in comparison to the construction companies and everyone else that is involved in the project too. So there's a power imbalance there as well that's, I'm sure, hard to navigate at times.
It is, and a lot of times public art projects are usually funded 1% of the overall costs of the public project, right? So there's people in there who are taking care of 99% of the budget, and then you come in with your issues, you're just 1%, you sort of try to get overlooked. So you have to make sure that, and it's a bit hard, definitely. We've had clients where it's been tough and so on, but you have to just push through. That's how it is.
You can go to the next slide, Emily, please. So these are the off-the-shelf components that we use for this project. So LED bars that were sourced from a supplier, from a lighting supplier, and the unistrut for the substructure to mount the LED bars to. And like I mentioned before, we designed the pattern to work with our light fixtures, but the panels themselves were supplied by the owner and the construction team. And just one thing before moving on. So as far as budget, you know, we're able to allocate pretty close rough estimates for how much things are going to cost. We still add a certain
Contingency.
allowance, contingency allowance, or bump up the numbers to make sure we cover. And that's something that it's important. Make sure you're covering because that is still very initial phase of design, whether you're not sure whether the light fixture is going to work fully. Especially for this one, we actually ended up changing light fixtures a couple of times just to make sure it fit within the cube, as Vivek was saying, because we have such a narrow space. We had to account for the unistrut and the light fixture, which all of it took space. There was a point where we actually requested the
design to change so
architect,
we could get more space.
to increase that space, which is something
it was like a Swiss watch, pretty much.
Mhm.
It was little pieces it was getting in.
But Victor, I think that's such a good point too about like padding it, like not just taking the number from the website of this costs $2 a square foot or whatever, because you know, if you do have to pivot to a different material, different medium, it's helpful if there's a little cushion there. It's also, you know, you've got shipping of materials or handling costs that sometimes tax costs. You know, there's all of these little adds. It's not just that. Yeah. Totally.
And exactly, and fixtures go up in price. You know, they go up in price because especially when you're dealing with a project that's going to last 2 years, and you're not going to order until it's like 6 months before. So,
Totally.
so you have to, and then Vivek and I will discuss it later in the slides. But inflation it's another aspect that you have to consider. Next, please. Here is some installation pictures just to show kind of the complexity of and all the components that kind of went into this, how we had to be there at a certain time to work with the construction team. We got a very narrow window. On the left image, you see the unit strut running horizontal. And also some of the cable, there you go. Some of the cables that will control the light fixtures. Those were just items that are coordinated throughout the construction. On the middle one, you already see the light fixtures installed as an array. The LED bars is being installed as an array. And the biggest challenge for this one is that in order for the light fixtures to align with the metal perforations, they had to be installed one after the other. We did run into an issue where the contractor, the general contractor of the project, did not communicate to us that they were not ready for us to be there. So it did cause delays for our install to begin, and that added unexpected cost. So we had to deal with that issue. Fortunately, we were able to solve it, but it did take it took effort, and that was I was gonna say that was because there was just a lack of communication.
And that lack of communication can sometimes cost in real dollars. I think, you know, there's a phrase that I've heard in the construction world before and want to pass on here. I'm sure you guys know it, which is follow-on costs. So you have a scope of work and then someone's going to follow on behind you with their scope of work. And if your scope takes longer and the follow-on folks can't come in as planned, they might be holding material in storage longer. And sometimes folks will want to pass on those costs to the person that's delayed the follow-on. So I think it's really essential to understand in these types of work projects that your actions and others' actions have impacts, and sometimes those impacts are financial. If you have a client that's understanding, that'll work with you, it's great, but I have seen artists try to get hit by follow-on costs because something's taken a little longer, and the next guy who's supposed to come in is like, I'm paying by the hour to hold this material that I can't drop off yet, so I think that's such a, in this case, you were the follow-on, you were being held up and incurring costs in that case. But it's also good to note when maybe the artist sometimes isn't quite aware of what might be impacted.
Exactly, and that it's important to communicate that as soon as the moment you need to bring it up to the team, because every day counts. Every day counts, and everyone needs to be aware of what has to happen in order to solve the issue, the conflict, right? So it's just really important to communicate. Yeah, because for this one, like, our installers were coming from a different state, so they had to mobilize, and it was unfortunate that the team was not ready for us, because it did end up costing. So and just to finish up on this slide, on the left we have that metal panel with the light fixtures behind, and then just the light fixtures are waiting for that next metal panel to be installed. Yes. Okay, next slide. Yeah, so just to add to some of the challenges that we've already discussed for this project, and just what we were able to foresee and not foresee. So of course, the design services we kind of knew ahead of time. LED fixtures, we had an idea, but as I mentioned, they changed. So we had that rough estimate. That was a great basis to start our initial budget, and then we added additional padding to make sure we were covered for those factors that drive the price up. Installation costs were unknown at the time of our initial budget, so we put together an allowance just based on previous experience from other projects. So an allowance is just something, just given a number,
set aside
for what you have, what you have to target, to like a budget number that you have to kind of meet in a way. So that's when you find different installers, different installers throughout the process, as the more you get more information from the design. So the complexity of the installation itself was something we knew, we anticipated, so we make sure we had also allowances and contingencies for that.
And
one thing we did not foresee, and we kind of lucked out on it, it was the long lead times for ordering the fixtures. So it is really important to understand how long things are going to take to be delivered from the time you order them. It ties back to having cash flow, right, as we were mentioning earlier. So first of all, make sure you have the funds to buy the fixtures or the supplies, and understanding how long it's going to take. Because sometimes it could take 16 weeks, 20 weeks, and that's going to hugely impact your schedule. Okay. Anything else you want to add, Vivek, or?
No, I think that's good. We've given a good idea of two very different projects. One really complex, custom. The other complex, but not as custom. So what we're going to do now is to get into detail about how do we go about budgeting for projects like this? Where do we start, and so on? And I just to let the attendees know, I am keeping track of the questions that are coming in. I think a few of them will be answered by the slides that come, but we'll obviously address the ones that are not as we go forward. So you can go to the next slide. And yeah, this is where the pictures stop and the boring stuff starts. So yeah, this is so as you said, like one of the first questions is how complex is your project? How complex is your design? What is it you want to do? I think the most obvious thing is that if you have a large budget, then it allows you more leeway to do something that's a little out of the box. But if you have a low budget, we've had budgets as low as $80,000, $100,000. In that case, you can't make virtual sky or skyline. It's just impossible. You cannot come up with artwork like this. You have to come up with something that is quick and just it's ready to, put it out there. So, well, that's the first question that goes in, and that goes to your design team as well. Victor and I do design a lot, and earlier on in our employment, we design more. We manage a lot more now. But you have to make sure that your designers are on the same page and I'm talking as a project manager and a person who takes care of the whole thing. So it always starts from the design. Don't overpromise or be too ambitious. Try to be, within the limits of the budget that is given to you. And one of the good methodologies, some of the things that you want to think of when you're budgeting, number one is scope management. Who does what, who builds what, and who pays for what. So there are, like we said in our projects, we as the artists come in and put our artwork into a building that's already under construction. So there are certain things that are within the building that's just easier for the building guys to make. Doesn't make sense for our people to go in and sort of, step on other people's toes and do it. It'll cost more anyways. So try to, get a clear budget, a clear scope demarcation with your client and negotiate this as part of your contracts with them. And make sure you know who is responsible for what. So who designs, the artist designs this, your structural engineer does this, and so on. And then the client provides us this, the project team provides us this, our installers do this, and so on. And who pays for what? So there's usually an artwork budget, which is what your client tells you is what your artwork should cost. Work backwards from that. And there's obviously an overall budget for the building where your artwork goes into, right? And try to get certain items, especially the invisible items, put into the project budget rather than your artwork budget. Try to argue with your clients that you'd rather spend your artwork budget on things that can be seen and is out there, not on structures and skeletons and wires and stuff that comes to the artwork, and try to negotiate that as part of your thing. What we do for that is we try to define our artwork as plug and play. And plug and play is pretty much any toaster, microwave in your home. You take it, you plug it into your building, and you can play with it, right? That's how we try to present our artwork. So we'll bring the artwork, but you need to bring the power. You need to give us the plug points. You need to give us the structure so we can hang the artwork or keep it there. You need to bring the water here. You need to bring, so try to get those items, the invisible items, put onto the client's budget or to the project budget and keep it away from the artwork budget. So that's some of the strategies that we use. So we use the term plug and play, and we use that a lot with our clients. So it's sort of they internalize what plug and play means. And then
to add to that, Vivek, I feel like a lot of clients understand a distinction between like behind the wall, in front of the wall, or underground, above ground. Like things within the building or under the ground are like part of the building, are client costs, and then things out past that are more, so if you think about the wiring running through the building up to the socket or the foundation up to the, platform, and then the art is what comes on top.
Right. It's a contracting thing in language. So if you say underground and above ground, and if there's stuff that's above ground, but it's not, it's wiring, then the client will say that, oh, it's not underground, so I'm not going to pay for it. So you have to be careful about the language you use to demarcate. That's why using plug and play for your artwork is one of the better terms.
Yeah.
Our artwork comes, plugs, and you can play. But you need to provide us whatever comes to that artwork, whether it's underground, overground, in a hedge, or anywhere. It doesn't matter. You need to provide that, right? And the next is budget allocation. So always remember, the higher the complexity of the project, the larger allocation of budget to additionals, contingencies, allowances, and uncertainties. So you're given an artwork budget, you're in the competition phase by the client, you work backwards from that. And there's been a couple of questions about how much the artist fee is. We will come to that in a couple of slides. We work backwards to that as well. And like we mentioned before, engage your fabricators, installers, consultants as early as possible to get rough order of magnitude numbers. The more tighter your numbers are early on, the less your stress as you go further into the project. And the more complexity, obviously, the project, then you have to have more ROM and allowance numbers. We use a lot of our previous projects as comparables. So if we can't figure out, okay, what's this going to cost? So you haven't designed it yet. It's custom, right? And try to just take out that chunk of your design and figure out somewhere in your earlier projects something similar. Look at those costs. Add inflation, obviously depends. If it was a 20-year-old project, you need to really double or triple the costs, or at least, right? So work with comparables like that. And obviously use off-the-shelf products like Clockify, Office Timeline. There are a lot of apps online to keep you organized, for you to figure out your cash flows, your schedules, this thing. You can just use spreadsheets. We use a lot of spreadsheets as well, and so on. And of course, the third main consideration in budget is always contracting. Contract and budget are very tied together. We won't go much into contracts because I know you guys have had a session about contracting separately. But the three things that you should probably really keep in mind is the force majeure clause, indemnification, and of course, add services and changes, extraordinary circumstances. We'll go more into detail as we go to the next one. Next slide, please. So this is a typical scope matrix that we use. So this is defining who does what and who pays for what. This is the way we manage our scope. We usually get this agreed on with the client. It's part of the contract with our client. And we end up using the same document with our contracts with our subcontractors. So there's no 2 or 3 documents all over the place. You won't have, scope missed here or there. You decide on it early and you make sure that's used in the contracts going forward. So as you see here, like this is just an example, obviously. But if you look at the scope demarcation columns, you have the artist team, which is us and our team, our consultants, and the project team, which is the contractors on site for the building where we are plugging into, right? So we obviously, the design of our artwork is the artist team scope. The secondary structure, now that's interesting. So that's the structure from which our artwork hangs. We try to negotiate that to be part of the budgeting with the client. I'll come to that in a bit. But obviously the designing and the installation will be done by our team because our artwork is connected to it. So we want to be aware of that. Now, low voltage electrical and Ethernet wiring. So wiring is within the walls of a building. We want to put that as part of the electrical subcontractor of the project team. They are responsible for getting all the wires to where we let them know we get it, right? And of course, you can see adjustments to ceiling. It's no longer part of the thing, but it was there as part of that, the audio component. And of course, the equipment room. So there's two. So this particular artwork that we've taken this example from, the artwork is hanging from a ceiling in the atrium. And then we have an equipment room where the main controls for the artwork are. So again, we've taken the scope of the equipment room infrastructure and divided it and tried to negotiate as much of the work, of the behind the scenes work to be done by the project team as much as possible. And the columns on the right are for the budget allocation. So as much as possible, we try to negotiate, especially the Unistrut secondary structure. A lot of our projects, we put that into the main project budget over here. We were not successful in this case, but we want to try to move that over here. All of this stuff, we are trying to move it into this contingency, but we want to keep it in this part. So like, that try to get most of the scope out of your this thing and get it onto the main project and the contingency. So there's a scope matrix that's there available on the slide for you guys to refer to. You can build this as you like. This is a simple like spreadsheet that we use. You can go to the next slide. Thank you. So now this is where we work backwards from our budget. We have an artwork budget and we work backwards from it. The gray rectangle on the right is from LA County Arts and Culture. So this is a division that LA County Arts and Culture has given, and it's available for everyone to use. The one on the left is from Narduli Studio. And this is the way we work, and it's a little more detailed than the one from LA County Arts. And I think it'll answer some of the questions that have come in through Zoom. So let's start at the bottom line, obviously, the most important. So we have the total artwork budget, and that's what is the client tells you is what your artwork needs to cost. Your fee, installation, fabrication, everything needs to be part of that. We encourage the client to keep a contingency in addition to that, usually 15%, anywhere between 15 to 25%, depending on the complexity of the project. More complex, higher contingency. So we always encourage our client to keep funds separate from the artwork budget, but there for extraordinary circumstances and accessible upon approval from the client. But the 1 million that is there in the bottom line right now, that is available to the artist. It's for us to take and do as we please, and then we get this thing. So we work backwards from that. So one of the questions was, what is a usual design fee or an artist fee? This is a breakdown of that. Design fee is usually 15%, but the artist's remuneration or what the artist takes in should be between 20 and 25%. I would say 25%. Start at 25% early on. Do not err on the conservative, as they say. And to sort of break it down, the design fee is 15%, construction documentation, administration, management, insurance, travel allowances, so on, gives you a breakdown of that. And then what's left is 750,000, right? Now, out of that 750,000, we would say 15% would go to consultants. These are consultants who are like structural engineers, electrical engineers, and so on. So we have, we have LED and animated artwork. So we have a lot of electrical and structural work. You may have water features or fountains, and you would have a lot of plumbing and so on, structural work. So you have to look at that and sort of allocate this 15% to your consultants as you see fit. One of the things we have is program and content development as well as permitting. Permitting is obviously putting your drawings through and getting the approvals from the agencies. So then you remove the 15%, you have $600,000. Okay, so $600,000. We really encourage a minimum 15% contingency. Now, the contingency is funds that are available to be used as needed, but you're not putting it in your design. You're keeping it aside just in case there are some, surprises and so on that come up. 15% is a bare minimum. I would say 20%, but 15% is the absolute bare minimum you put aside. So you take out another 150,000. What you have is $450,000 left. Okay. Now, I think the last 20 years has been really interesting. We've had the worst depression, economic activity since the Great Depression. That's a once 100-year event. We've had the worst pandemic since the Spanish flu. That was 100 years ago. So we've had two events, which usually happens once a century, within 10 years of there. So this is something that you can never you can never look for, foresee this. So that's the reason that contingency exists. And now, you have to think about price inflation as well, because one of the things that happened with COVID was, apart from the supply chain, and the things were not being delivered, inflation has reached 6 or 7%. Now it's close to 5. What that basically means is if you have a 2-year project, then you have a 15% increase in costs starting from day one up to the end of the project. So you have to take out 15 to 25% just for, inflation and contingencies. So what our advice is that this price inflation and contingency figure together should be 25%, maybe as low as 20%, but the contingency and inflation together should be minimum 20%. So contingency should be 15%. So overall, after you start at 1 million, remove your fees, remove contingencies, remove consultant stuff, what you're left with in the end is about $300,000 to $450,000 to spend on materials, fabrication, installation. So whatever you're designing has to be designed with that in target. You're not designing a 1 million sculpture or artwork. You're designing a $300,000 to $450,000 sculpture, but you're getting paid 1 million for it. And that's the only way the numbers work. Otherwise, you'll go out of business in a matter of 2 or 3 years. So it's hopefully this slide with its specifics, you can read into it more in detail, but it should be helpful for you guys to start like putting together at least early on budgets in your competition phase, and then not have them burn you later on as you get into construction. You can go to the next slide. So that mostly takes care of the budgeting stuff, and what's left is the contracting issues. And these are certain things that you should consider. You can read the slide at your convenience. The main thing is force majeure. Force majeure is like it says on the slide, is a provision contract frees both parties, which is you and the client, or you and your subcontractors, whoever the contract is between. It frees you when there are extraordinary circumstances. Like what? Like COVID, like war, like a typhoon, or some conditions like that. You need to have these clauses in your contract so you make sure you're covered as well as your client is covered. Indemnification is also a liability thing that usually these clauses are written in a way that when you have a client contract, the client asks you to indemnify them from any claims or stuff that may come up against you. As much as possible, try to make it mutual so that the client indemnifies you and you indemnify the client. And the same clause with your subcontractors as well. You indemnify each other and so on. We've given some sources online for these two clauses. You can read about that more in detail. And obviously, with the contingencies, allowances that we talked about in the budget, have clauses in your contract which clearly state what happens if there are ad services. If the client makes a design change late in the process, then you need to be able to go to the client and say, listen, this is too late in the phase. We've already started work on this. If you want this change, then you need to give us extra money to cover the costs and so on. This stuff has to be in the contracts as well. And just before I end and give it back to Victor, if we can go back to the previous slide. Yeah, thank you. So one of the questions that came in on Zoom was how that California requires your first deposit to be 20%. So how do you negotiate getting more deposits? So that 20% clause is at the beginning of your contract. So it's your first phase, okay? So if you remember when we talked about the phases, the first two phases were design development and construction documentation. And then the later phases were fabrication and so on. So this 20% clause only affects you in your first phase, which is your design phase. You're not charging your client for the whole project at that time. You're charging them mostly this 25% fee because you're trying to get the design done. You're trying to get your consultants paid, right? So if you're looking at this budget, what you're invoicing in the first two phases is 250 plus 150, maybe 400 to 500,000. So 20% of that is you are fully within your right to ask 20% of that as a deposit. So it's never going to be 20% of 1 million is what my point is. So you're never going to hit that clause and so on. We have to pay 50% deposits at fabrication. And that's just standard. 50% is a minimum. You go to any fabricator, they'll ask you 50% upfront so they can buy materials, they can start the work. And then you usually pay 25%, or you usually break it down as such. We are very clear with the clients at the beginning of the project that that's how things work. So at the third phase, which is the fabrication and procurement, we usually charge 50% of the project budget at that point, so that we get all the money in hand and we can make all the deposits. Again, the 20% clause does not affect that, because this you've charged this in the middle of your contract, not at the beginning. And even if I've not had a client who's, once they've been explained that 50% deposits are needed for fabrication, they've always been okay with paying us what we ask for at that phase. So I hope that answers those questions over there. You can, next slide, please. Great. Victor, you can.
Yeah, and we just wanted to wrap up with just a few key points for managing a project budget. You know, as we mentioned earlier, it is going to be a team effort between the client, contractor, fabricator, and artist. And part of it, what makes it rewarding, it's everyone coming together and actually, you know, making the effort to accomplish you staying within the budget and making every possible change or every possible deed to get into that budget. Managing the project much is going to require constant tracking. You're going to be tracking hours. You're going to be tracking costs. It's very important to track your hours. Just to understand you're staying within your fees, because otherwise you could run into scope creep or go over budget within your design fees. And periodically updating your budgets is just going to be really important to do that. And it's like one key task to really successfully delivering a project. It's very important. As we mentioned earlier, design complexity, budget, and schedule are just three factors that are integrated and very important to deliver the project. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you both so much for sharing all of that and for sharing such a behind the curtain scenes of what takes and what goes into these projects. And I really appreciated, Victor, that final summation slide, because I think talking about money, talking about budgets is really stressful and oftentimes anxiety producing. But I think it's a really nice thing to remember that when folks do come together and look at it clearly and transparently, and kind of that there can be a lot of satisfaction in realizing something and knowing what's been done. And I really appreciated that final reminder. I'm going to take us out of screen share for a moment so I can see the Q&A as well. And Ali, if you want to bring Brianna as well back. So Brianna McGillivray from the LA County Arts and Culture will join us for the Q&A section as well, in case there are some questions that are specific to LA County Arts and Culture. Hey, Brianna.
Hi. Hi, thank you for such a wonderful presentation, Victor and Vivek. That was just so comprehensive and detailed. I really appreciated it.
Thank you.
So let's jump into our questions.
All right. So one question we got was, it's for Narduli Studio. Have you ever capped a budget by line item within a budget contract negotiation? So like the installation not to exceed or a certain material cost not to exceed.
No, we have not, right, Vivek? And
we have fixed,
something
yeah,
we do
we
not want to do. Yeah.
You don't know, like it depends. It depends on your design. So if it depends on what your artwork is. If you know exactly what your components are and how much they cost, then that's something you should do. But our projects are so custom that we would never risk that. And we get, like we said, we get the artwork budget, and that's fixed. we can ask for additional funds if the project gets delayed and like COVID happens or so on. But we start from that.
Hmm.
So like, and we work backwards, like I showed you in the budget sheet, like we work backwards from that and figure out, okay, what can we actually afford as far as the artwork goes. After we pay ourselves, after we pay the people we need to help us, what's left and what can be actually built. So that's how we work.
Yeah, and one of the reasons why you wouldn't want to do that, I mean, at the end of the day, your initial budget is a guideline. You're still going to be responsible for meeting the project budget and staying within that fixed fee. You really don't want to go into contingencies unless it's really necessary, and that is just bad news to even get into that. But say, for example, installation costs turn out to be higher, but fabrication came lower, you could exchange funds from one of the categories to the other one, and it's your responsibility at the end of the day. So it's not something that you want to cap or limit yourself to.
We've had certain cases where installation costs have come in almost 3 times what we anticipated. So in that case, we've had to go back to the client and say, all right, this is just way higher. So we would need to dip into the contingency and pay for this, because if we subtract that from what the budget is right now, then you won't be able to afford the art anymore. It's just like you'll have the money to install it, but there's nothing to install. There's like
That kind of leads us into our next question, which is, they're asking, how often is the budget off in general, as in like too low, and alternatively,
it's always going to be off. You're never going to get a right budget. It's never, and you're always going to lowball it, especially electrical engineering. I've never made, like, I had a single project where electrical came in at what we thought it's going to be. It always came in 2 or 3 times higher. And electricians have you over the barrel because nobody else can do their work, really. You don't want to get into that, right? And stuff. So it's the same with plumbers or things like that. So yeah, like you're going to make mistakes and your budget is going to be off. That's the reason that 15% contingency is there. The price inflation set aside is there. Allowances are there so that you can work through it. You can be nimble.
So then what about a project timeline? How much longer does a project generally take compared to the initial estimate?
I'll let Victor answer this as well, but like until COVID happened, we used to hit project deadlines more often than not. Since COVID, it's been a lot more complicated. Almost every project has been delayed and become longer, and we've had the same fixed fee. So a project which we would have ended in a year and a half is now 3-4 years along, and we're losing money on it, but we have to deliver.
Yeah, now to add to that, it depends on whose fault as well. If the delays are caused by contractor or not the artist, anyone else, you might have an argument to ask for additional funds to cover additional project management services that you may incur. But yeah, I mean, it's difficult. It's a difficult time now to really estimate timelines and schedules, and it's always in flux because you're not the only one responsible for it. It's also the entire team.
Thank you. So our next question is talking about scheduling payment milestones. Do you have any advice on scheduling payment milestones with multi-year projects, especially when construction delays seem inevitable? Do you ever run into issues with cash flow or poorly timed payments affecting taxes as a result?
Sorry.
So usually your timelines are just gonna be that regardless of whether, and it depends on which delays are being referred to, but assuming that the delays are on your end, you're not gonna be able to invoice or get the cash flow until certain milestone is completed, period. It's just you have to meet that deliverable. And if it's caused by others, then you shouldn't be affected by it. As long as you're meeting your deliverables, you should be able to invoice and get paid for the work that has been done. Cash flow is always a battle. We've definitely run into issues all the time, and we just try to be proactive. You know, it's just a matter of establishing cash flow tied to your milestones, like Vivek was saying, trying to get money beforehand, and you have an argument for that. You have an argument to meet the schedule, and you need to be able to pay your consultants, your team, everything that has to be accounted for. But certainly we do run into cash flow issues, and also it's a matter of, you know, processing time as well by the client. It takes, it could take up to a month or sometimes longer, and it's something you have to plan ahead. And sometimes you have to ask the client to expedite the payments, and they'll work with you as much
I
as they
would
can.
also add, it's really important to look at what the billing procedures are, because sometimes that's an unknown hurdle too. Like, it's not even just the wait on the end to receive the payment, but sometimes there's hurdles to even be able to put it in, like certain reports. I mean, we've worked on projects with governments that required us to have about 8 or 9 different documents notarized every time we invoiced, you know, so you
Yeah,
had
exactly.
to like factor that in too. So looking at both the receiving side of the funds, but also what it takes, what hurdles might be in place to even put the invoices in.
Yeah, and I would add to that, you know, just from like more of a client perspective, it's really important that you know, an artist just not be afraid to ask those questions early on about billing procedures, about timelines, about, you know, what kind of troubleshooting can happen if you do run into cash flow problems. You know, it's if anything, I think the client appreciates hearing about those things sooner rather than like, oh my God, this, you know, payment still hasn't been made 30 days later, or, you know, I'm really stuck here because I can't proceed with the work. And so, you know, just speaking from LA County side, we always appreciate like more, you know, open dialogue about that. So just, you know, be aware of that. Don't be afraid to ask those questions, and stay on, you know, the client about payments, or about, you know, the need maybe to take out a partial payment to cover, you know, a situation where your cash flow is lean. So
Yeah, very good points.
So this question has come up in contracts a lot, and it is a tough one. Is it possible a client asks for a bond?
I think there have been instances, but I don't know about you, Victor, but I've never had to personally deal with that side of things because Susan
Yeah.
takes care of that client side. No.
But and I don't think we've had to.
I can answer this one because it's come up for us in the past. There are definitely instances where clients will ask for a performance bond. That is a very common thing in the construction world. And sometimes if you're being contracted through a construction world scenario, there can be cases where they think that's just normal. And so that's an education piece. I would say it would be very uncommon. I've never known an artist to actually end up having to put up a performance bond. I don't think that there are any bond companies that would even do that, but you're gonna have to do some education on that front if you're asked for it. It's probably a signal that this person has not commissioned art before. They've not worked with artists before. And so it might be a clue to you to look at what else they're asking that might be coming more from a construction mindset, construction world mindset, than from an artist contracting mindset. And you might need to get a lawyer involved to help make that argument if they're really sticking to it, because it's not something that artists can even get. And I've never heard of an artist being able to get it, but I have heard of artists being asked to. And so it's a piece where you have to educate.
Yeah.
So going back to the artist fee, we received quite a few questions about it, and especially around the 20%. I'll start with this question. Since the artist stipend is usually 20%, are there additional line items you can add for labor, or is that categorized somewhere else?
I think that slide with the budget, if we can just show that, we can quickly discuss it. But we've broken down the artist fees into design fee, and we have construction documentation, which is, the drawings, technical drawings and stuff. Construction administration is during construction. Victor and I usually go on site, or people tied to us go on site and make sure things are happening. Project management, obviously, we have insurance costs and travel allowances. This is specific to us, but you have to look at your business and your previous projects and see where expenses are. And within this overall design fees, so this budget allocation, or these numbers, like if I was given a 1 million budget, then during the competition phase, this is what I would, give the client. I'll say the design fees are 250, consultant fees 150. We're having a 150K contingency, and then we have 450,000, which will divide up into materials, labor, installation, fabrication, and so on, and break that down. So you're deciding pretty early in the process that 250K is your design fee, right? Sorry, your overall artist fees. So your design fee and all these other costs, labor. I'm guessing people would have labor costs if you're a fabricator as well as an artist as well. Then you would have labor costs and so on. Then you have to keep that separate though, because the design fees here is just for design and drawings and your mind and the ideas. So the fabrication labor should be going into your materials fabrication. That's the top line over here. So you have to divide it that way.
I know we talked about this in a different context recently, but you are also advocating as well for artist budgeting for project management as separate from their design fees. And I think it's great to highlight, like, the design fee is not a catch-all for everything the artist does, that the artist may have other roles, and those roles, whether it's them or someone else being the project manager, or if them or someone else fabricating, those other roles are funded separately.
Right.
It's that the design fee is a distinct fee that is the artist's mind and their creative process.
This is especially with the milestones that we mentioned, right? So your first 2-3 phases is design.
Yep.
So this 250K covers that first 2-3 phases, but then the rest of the money covers what happens in the last 3 phases, which is from fabrication, installation, and then project closeout. So we've divided it that way. But depending on the artist and what their artwork is, you can change this. This is not written in stone. So you can change this spreadsheet and gear it towards your businesses. For sure. You shouldn't use it straight off like this. And similarly, you shouldn't use LA County Arts and Culture's breakdown straight up either. You have to think of it in terms of your businesses. Look at your previous projects. See where you lost money before, see where you gained money before, and try to break it down or work backwards in that way. And the contingency, I think there was another question down the line as well. The contingency which you have set aside, 90% of the time you're going to use it, most of it. But whatever you don't is your money to keep. That's the understanding of a fixed fee. They've told you we need it for 1 million. You set aside a contingency for externalities, but if everything goes well and everything gets there on time and you get it done for what you actually, then you made that extra money, then you should be happy with it. And there's nobody who can take that from you.
Really think what you said there, Victor, or Vivek, I'm sorry, is super important for folks who maybe haven't done a project before and don't have projects that you can look back on and say, oh, we made money here, didn't. If it's your first one, you don't have those things to look back on. So I think it's really smart to think about what your tolerance is for risk.
Right.
And
if it's your first project, that means your uncertainty is the highest it'll ever be.
Exactly.
So you have higher contingencies, higher allowances, and so.
And maybe don't go for $1 million project.
Well, the bottom line doesn't matter. what you have to understand is that you work backwards to a number that you can afford,
Yeah.
whatever the bottom line is.
Yeah, and that you're comfortable with the risk that you're
Right.
taking on at that point. Go ahead.
Yeah. Just one final question regarding the artist fee. Do you see like, is the 20% general for public, commercial, and private commissions? This might be a question for everyone.
20% usual. Ask for 25%. Start with 25%.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you shouldn't ever go lower than 20%, and we sometimes see that artists kind of lowballing, you know, their rates or their work, and that's just not a good practice to be in. But I think also I would agree, you know, if you always ask for more. You know, you can always be brought down, but always ask for more.
Yeah, it
don't
becomes
know that-
a negotiation tool.
Yeah.
And to answer the question exactly, I think we're all speaking about public art. I would not want to extend that to commercial art or graphic art. I don't know what the standards in those fields are. I think we're speaking very specifically about public art.
Especially where you have construction involved, large scale, like this is definitely the standard. Nobody's going to question a 20-25% design fee on artwork.
Mhm.
Yeah.
You
I
want to
mean,
make 40%, include that contingency, ideally, but yeah, that never happens.
But be prepared to answer questions about that, because that's the other thing, you know, you can't just inflate a budget and then expect it to, you know, not get any pushback. So do be realistic as well.
Yeah.
Another question we received was about the initial kind of non-compensated hours. How do you recoup those work hours in your budget? Is it from contingency?
So again, then in that you don't need to show the slide though. In that slide, there's the design fees line item, not the main design fees, which is 25%, but 15%. That's the actual design fees. You want to keep all your hours within that. Now, what's your overhead? What you actually pay your employees versus what you need to pull in? That's again business specific. We can't get into details like that. If you're paying your employee $50 an hour, then you should be recouping $100 an hour for his hours, because the remaining 50 goes to your business pay, rent, electricity, and so on. That's the overhead, right? So work backwards from that number which you get for the design fee and see how many hours you have for the project. Divide it into your milestone phases, you know, schematic design, so many hours, and keep a little bit of it for your competition. Keep a track of how many hours you spent in the competition and try to recoup those. You know, maybe you don't need as many hours in design development or something. You can reduce the hours over there or something like that. But keep track of the hours and work backwards from your number to get the total number of hours you can dedicate to your project. Obviously, if you're just one person, then it's just your hours and your hourly fee. But if you have 5 people on your team or 10 people on your team, then you need to take each of them into consideration and break it down that way. You know, with a spreadsheet, you can get as detailed as you want and try to foresee it.
Amazing to highlight, because I think so many artists just do whatever.
You just want to get the project done. And that's
Work however many hours,
Yeah.
do whatever, and that leads to burnout, it leads to frustration, and it leads to an increase in unsustainable practices. You know, so, you know, that makes it where you actually defund yourself and defund your project. So setting a rate of this is what my hourly rate is, and then taking that design fee and going, I have this
this many
rate
hours. Yeah.
divided by this gives me this many hours, back out a
And
few.
yeah, keep a contingency in that too, the number of hours.
Yep.
So
Because also, if you are getting a lot of design revisions from your client, you know, and it's adding on to these hours, if you're tracking that, you can go back to the client and say, hey, you've asked for like 3 or 4 design rounds, divisions. I'm at this many hours. we got to talk about this. But if you don't
Right.
have that information, if you're not tracking that, you can't do that. You can't go to a client with just, I feel like I've done more, you know?
Mhm.
That's such an important thing. And it's such a thing that many, many artists don't do because
You'll have to justify the hours you're telling your client, obviously. Like,
Yeah.
if the physical work isn't there, then the client needs to be aware that there's been so many meetings, there's been so much discussions happen.
Yep.
So like, just get work backwards to your number of hours, remove some for contingency, whatever's left, divide it among all your phases.
Mhm.
So you have for each phase, so say for schematic design, you have 25 hours, right?
Yep.
So when you reach 10 hours, when you reach 20 hours, you need to let the client know.
Hmm.
Okay, we've finished 10 of the 25 that's available. You need to make your decisions now. Otherwise, this is going to go over. We're going to ask for an ad service in this phase right now.
Yeah.
And one thing you can also let clients know, it's always cheaper. Ad services will definitely be a lot cheaper in the first three phases, which is competition, schematic design, and construction documentation. Any ad services or extra hours here will be way cheaper than anything that comes in the later phases, because when you're making items, you're fabricating changes to design, then your costs will double, triple. So it's important that the client understands that and the artist understands.
I know we're 10 out, so I'm gonna ask the two last questions. What is the typical size of a team for a public art project, and what are the roles?
Mm.
We are like 3 to 5 people, our projects. There are designers with 20 people, 25 people. I mean, there's a varied amount of sizes in this thing. In our small firm, the roles are mainly the principal, who's Susan Narduli, and we are the 2 project managers. And then we have designers, program developers, and so on. And obviously, like a more junior designer as well. Basically, what Victor and I were 10, 15 years ago, we have a person like that now to help us out. But that's typically our structure. But a design firm can be any size.
Yeah, it's really gonna vary, and it could be 1 person to 20. So it's just gonna be
200. I mean, it's
how much you want to take on and how much help do you need.
Yeah, and I would just say, for the individual artists out there listening, don't be discouraged by seeing, big studios get these large projects, because it's a very varied ecosystem, and there are 1-person, 2-person teams, and then there are, 5 and 10 and 20-person teams. So, part of what our department is really pushing is to create more opportunities for individual artists to get into public arts who don't have, the resources and the staff to support their growth. And so, just be aware of that. And we're also, I'm working on a project right now with one artist that, she has $1 million project. So, and she's managing it all herself. So it's not that it can't be done. It is obviously much more fruitful to have support always. It's, important, but, with, what we're trying to do at the Department of Arts and Culture is really provide a lot of that supportive staffing, and additional resources for individual artists.
If you're a
Yeah.
smaller team, you may want to just increase that professional services line a bit, because you might need some more temporary professional services. You might need to hire a project manager for a little while, or need to bring in some additional support. So it may not be that you have that in your studio all the time, but for a specific project, you might increase the budget for those professional services and bring them in. And again, as Brianna was saying, there's so many resources with commissioning agencies that might be able to recommend people that could work with you, and they could bring on for a project to help support some of those roles. But I think a project manager is a great key role.
Yep.
I would say it gives, what Victor and Vivek have talked about tonight are things that sometimes it's really nice for the artist to have some distance on and to not be the person always going to the commissioner and also be the artist. That's a tough thing, you know? And so I think that's certainly a role that whether you have all the time or you bring in project by project, I would highly recommend ensuring you have in your team.
Yes, I absolutely agree with that. And it's also something that when we are in conversation with artists that are, you know, kind of new to the field and maybe just got their first big commission, we highly encourage them to get an additional project manager who's not, you know, represented by LA County. Because it is, as Emily said, it's so critical to have a bit of that space and to have another eyes and, you know, set of eyes and ears on the kind of administrative management side of things.
Yeah, when I first started at Arduli Studio, we actually outsourced our project management. So we hire a consultant that would take care of all the project management. They would deal with the budgets, with the schedule, client communications, with the client project manager. So it was a third party that was part of our budget. So we had included that in our budget. And as we grew, as we developed as a team, we started to manage it ourselves. But it's just gonna be, you know, where you are in your career as an artist. I think it's definitely important for you to focus on the art and finding new commissions. So that's gonna take a lot of time. So you need help, and then there's resources out there for sure. And project management, it's a whole job.
We always separate project management from the design phase. You can see that on the slide as well. We have a separate line item for it. So those hours are separate. Like your project manager hours are those numbers. Work backwards from that.
So the last question of the night, it's a bit more abstract, and it was to Victor and Vivek. In your experience, what direction is public art going?
Materials, digital, that type of thing.
Well, digital is definitely more common now, for sure. I'll let Victor also answer in a bit. A lot of artificial intelligence will probably come in also now. I don't know much about artificial intelligence, so I cannot comment on that. A lot of things that we used to do manually before is taken and done by tech now. So, I mean, like at least even I'm actually old enough that my first job we drew by hand all our drawings, right? So it's then we moved to AutoCAD, and now you can just type in on ChatGPT or something and it'll create your drawing for you if you type correctly, of course, and you do a few times. So the digital and tech stuff has taken it in new ways. There are obviously new ideas, but the basics, the fundamentals are still the same. What public art does is to connect communities, to connect spaces. And that's been the same since Mesopotamia. So, you know, everybody congregates at the main bath or the main square or the theater or, you know, places where people come to. That stuff doesn't change. The way public art can show stuff, obviously we show a lot of LEDs and digital stuff, but I like just purely physical art as well. One of our projects was a fountain, the San Francisco Veterans Memorial. It's in front of City Hall in San Francisco. No digital stuff there, just lights, water, waterfall, and, you know, sculpture and etching on stone and things like that. I like art like that still. I don't think that's gonna go anywhere. I still buy comic books. I don't have to. I could get a PDF, you know. But I still do. I still buy books, so it's hard to say. But hopefully, like, yeah, it's the fundamentals and the urban thing about connecting communities and stuff. That stuff always stays the same, and that probably won't change.
Victor, what are your thoughts?
So yeah, definitely media arts and digital media, it's definitely driving some of the art world right now, but a lot of, you see a lot of DMX installations, light experiences, an immersive environment, which is some of the stuff that we tend to do as well. We generally like to explore new technologies in our work. As you've seen, we like to take on challenges, doing things that haven't done before, exploring new avenues for displaying a meaningful artwork. And it's what we like, and it's just kind of depending on each artist and each studio to drive that as well. It's just really gonna be each independent force of what you want to do.
Thank you both. That's such a great question to end on. And I'm going to bring us to our closing comments now. So my first closing comment is a big thank you to Vivek and Victor. What an informative session, and thank you to Brianna as well for joining us in this Q&A, and thank you as always to Ali as well. So as we always put up, we are designing a second round of workshops that will be delivered next year in the round 2 of this program. So as we come to the close of this round, if there are topics, if there are other workshops that you would like us to try to consider or to incorporate into the next round, or if you have feedback about this round of workshops, we will always want to hear from you. So please feel free to reach out to us. As Ali shared, we have our last 2 online workshops next week on Tuesday and Wednesday. So come back, join us in closing out this first series of the free professional development workshops in these last 2 sessions. And then, yeah, that's it for tonight. So thank you both so much. Thank you, Brianna, again as well. I learned a lot tonight myself. I'm going to go to the master class of Narduli spreadsheets.
Wow, I loved it.
Yeah. And I really appreciate all of the insight. The experience that you have is so beneficial, and it's not something we talk about enough. So I really, really welcome it and really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having us. It's been a pleasure, and we're glad that you were able to enjoy it, and hopefully it was informative for the audience as well. It's you always gotta try it. You guys gotta try it, and then you'll succeed.
Absolutely.
Thank you. This was a great opportunity. Really, thank you so much.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Good night. We'll see you
Thank you.
next week.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much.